you're just joining us, we'll be starting in a few minutes. So ready. You can actually, if you are on the events page, you can ask questions in the Q&A part, and we can take questions from there. And we'll be back on in just a few minutes. All right. Thank you all for joining us on this Google Hangout, where we're going to talk through some elements of the project grants that we have coming up. The deadline, which is April 4th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. I'm going to say that again because a lot of people think that it's a midnight deadline, but it's not. It's actually 5 p.m. on April 4th. My name is Scott Winchell. I'm the Director of Grant Making Programs. That's me. I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves. I am Sam Rising, the Grant Making and Social Media Manager.
And I'm Kristen Deering, the Associate Grant Making.
Just real quick about how this is going to work. This is mainly to field questions that you might have about applying for project grants. We're going to start, though, by kind of going through the form and tackling a few of the frequently asked questions and some of the areas where there are sometimes confusion or other things that sort of get in the way. If you are on the Google Hangout page, you can type in a question as we go right there. If you are not on the Google Hangout or you don't have the Google account, you can email your questions to info@newmusicusa using Hangout question or something along those lines. We'll get it and we can answer those live. So I think that's it. I'm going to let Sam take it away. Great. So the first thing we're going to do is walk through the project form itself, because I know a lot of people have questions specifically about that. So we'll just walk you through the creation and submission of a project page. So I'm going to begin sharing my screen. Okay. Whoa. All right. So this is the New Music USA homepage, and you can see I'm already logged in. Once you're logged in, just click on Grants and then navigate to the Project Grants Guidelines. Take some time to read through the guidelines to make sure that your project is eligible and everything's all good. Make sure you know that the deadline is April 4th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Once you get through all that, at the bottom, you will see a big blue button that says Start a New Project. start a new project, you just click that and it takes you to the next step. This is the first step in creating a project, which is entering all the public information like a project title. I'll just call it test project. The next step is tagging your project with the appropriate categories. And these categories serve to basically hook your project up with panelists in these areas to review it. So if you click dance, then your project will be reviewed by choreographers and people that work primarily in dance. If you click jazz, the same thing, your project will be hooked up with artists who work primarily in jazz. So use these categories sparingly because too many will make it difficult to assign your project to a panelist. But definitely use these categories wisely. Don't click off on everything. And just a note that if you check off dance, it will only be assigned to a dance panelist if a work sample contains dance work samples. So yeah, I would if your project includes dance in a significant way and you're including a work sample with dance in it, then definitely click dance. If dance is an element of your project but it's not being represented maybe fully in the project page itself, that's something you can talk about in the narrative, but maybe not click dance in this situation, because the projects that are click dance go to a review by choreographers. A lot of times we've had problems in the past where there is no actual work samples that demonstrate the dance quality, and so we don't want you to sort of get scored poorly for sort of a technicality. So be careful about how you tag, and think about it in terms of what's the best way to represent your project in terms of the actual reviewing of it. Mm-hmm. That's the best way to say it. Sure. So just for the purposes of this walkthrough, I'm going to define mine as small ensemble and recording. And before I move on, one quick thing that a lot of people miss are these question marks in each section. If you hover over a question mark just to the right, it gives you a little bit more information about how we want those things to be filled. And if you want to see even more, you can click on further help, and it contains a little more detail. And that's in every section, so type of project, performance dates, tagline, etc. So I have a project that is a small ensemble recording project. Let's say it's going to happen on one day, or no, I'll do over the course of 3 days. So there's a concert, let's say in July 21st to July 23rd. And for the dates, we generally want you to be as specific as possible if you can. So if you have actual dates lined up already, we ask that you use those dates. If you have a general idea, like this is going to happen in May, then you can do the beginning of May to the end of May. If it's more of like a seasonal thing, you can do something similar, but try not to use ranges that are over a year or even sometimes up to 2 years, because that doesn't really help us know when the project is actually happening. So the next step is a tagline. It's just a general overview of a project. So I'll say Scott Winship here's work. The public description is where you actually go into the bulk of your project, describing who's involved, what's happening, when it's happening, the impact that the project is going to have. And the impact is actually an important part of the project description and the project itself. During panel review, panelists during the first stage review projects based on artistry, which is mostly limited to the work samples. During the second stage, however, they focus on artistry and impact, and they're given equal weight. So conveying the impact that the project has either on you as an artist or the performing ensemble or a community directly or indirectly involved with the project is super important. So the description goes here, blah, blah, blah. You can use some of these formatting tools up top to make it look nice and pretty if you want. You don't have to. Just there. So then the next step is defining the project location. This is less of where the people in the project are based and more of where the project is actually happening. So if a project is happening, let's say in St. Louis, and then pick state, St. Louis, Missouri. If you're outside of the US, you just click outside the US and you can select the country. So let's say, well, I mean, I'll just leave it in St. Louis, but if you had something in Afghanistan, you could say Afghanistan and list the city there, but I'm just going to keep it in Missouri. Whoops. For now. And the next step is defining your role as the project organizer. So what is your role in the project that you are creating? In my example, it would be composer, since I am writing a piece for Scott, who is a flutist. And then the next step is to add collaborators to the project. So since Scott is premiering my piece, I'm going to tag Scott, typing his name, and if he has a profile, it'll come up, and you just invite it. I make his role flautist, and I can add up to 5 more collaborators. I'm just going to, for example, invite my colleague, Kristen. Also has a profile on the site, but I'm going to pretend that she doesn't. So if your collaborator does not have a profile on the site, you can click this at the bottom or invite a new user, which allows you to get them this way. So I'm going to put an email address for Kristen. I don't believe has an account tied to it yet, and I will add her to the project. Then the last part of step 1 is to add a header image, which I'm just going to, I have something already made. Please note that your image must be smaller than 1 megabyte, and that the dimension of the image should be a 16:9 aspect ratio or 706 by 397 pixels. If you upload anything larger than that, it'll automatically be cropped to fit our size dimensions. Okay, so the last step is to save. And as soon as I press save, my collaborators will receive an email asking them to join our project, or my project rather. And once they get the email, there will be a link that they click. And if they are a new user like Kristen, they will also receive login and password credentials, which they can use to log in. Once they log in, they'll change the password so that it's something that they can remember. One thing to note is that if your collaborator doesn't receive an email, it might be in their spam folder. If they do receive an email, but it doesn't have a name or password in it, then they can navigate to the login page on the upper right if they're logged out, and then click on recover username or password. And that's that. So if I just go back to the public information really fast, you can see that Scott and Kristen are now collaborators. There is an invitation sent to Kristen. Scott's collaboration is pending, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go back to step 2. The second step is actually adding work sample media to your project. So you can add a maximum of 3 work samples. They can be audio, video, or PDF documents. More specifically, you can upload your own MP3, or you can embed a YouTube, Vimeo, or SoundCloud link, or upload a PDF. At least 1 work sample is required on a project, but we suggest using all 3 to give the panel as much context as possible about the project. So to just quickly walk through this, I have some work samples I'm just going to embed. So, a new music box article or a new music box cover that's on SoundCloud right now. So I'm just going to put the information here. Pretend that Daniel Wool wasn't on this project, and I'll say it's a work sample of Scott performing on his flute. So I will say Scott is someone who worked on this. This private indication is something important. If you cannot make a work sample public, if you don't want to make it public, you can mark this as private, and it will only show up to panelists and staff. It'll never be publicly on your project page. So I'm just going to save that really fast. And I'll actually navigate back to it because I'm going to add a couple more. So click on add another work sample. This time I'll add Mazzoli interview. Also on new music box. I'll pretend that it's a piece I wrote with Kristen, and I do want this to be public, so I'll leave that. I'll add the third work sample, which is also a new music box interview, but this time from YouTube. Okay, this time I will say that it's a piece I wrote for Scott already so that you can get an idea of how we've already worked together in the past. This doesn't need to be private, so I'll save and go to step 3. Just a note again about media samples is that they should convey to the panel the quality and breadth of the work samples. Sorry, the high quality and breadth of the work that all or most of on a project have. So if it's a commission for new solo flute work for Scott by me, then obviously we would want to showcase Scott's work, my work, and if possible, the work that we have collaborated on in the past, if not the current work we are applying for. If you have, if you run into the fact, and this happens a few times, where there are too many collaborators, you can have up to 6 collaborators on a project. If you have it more than that, it's always good to include those collaborators in the format, and you can hyperlink to websites if that's appropriate. With the work sample situation, in that case, pick the 3 best work samples that you think represent the project and the folks involved. But also highly encourage your collaborators to make sure that they have a completed profile on our site, which includes work samples as well, because oftentimes our panel likes to find out about composers that they're not familiar with and look at their work through their profile, and that's the best way to do that, just so you know. Yep. Okay, so the last step in the process is the private information, which is your budget. So note that we can accommodate requests between $250 and $15,000. If your request is $1,500 or below, you don't need to list expenses. If it's greater than $1,500, then you will. So let's say I want to request $3,000. Well, let's say $8,000 for my project. Then once you enter the request, the expenses comes out. So let's say I'm going to request a commission fee of $5,000 and an artist fee of $3,000. You see that adds up to $8,000. What we tend to suggest is to list your request, but then you list the project expenses for the entire project. So while I listed commission fee and artist fee that added up to $8,000, let's also say that I'm listing a recording fee of $5,000. Now, oops, that's 50, not 5. So that the total project budget expenses are for $13,000, but we're only requesting $8,000 of that. This helps provide our staff and the panel with context about your request in terms of the larger scope of the project. Last but not least is the private description, where you can include any information that you don't necessarily want to include in your public description. The private description can include information about funding that's already secure, pending applications, really anything that you want a panel to see, but not the general public to see if your project is awarded. So here I'll say Scott's mom donated $1,000 already. So one thing to note about the private description is I would tend to try to use it very specifically and somewhat conservatively. If there's information about the project that you want folks to know, it's best to be put in the public narrative. The private description really is for those moments where there's stuff that either hasn't been confirmed or you're not sure about, or there's a few things that are sort of outstanding that you don't necessarily need to be public, but that would be useful for us or the panel to know. So use it sparingly in that way. Tell us about other funding you have secured or things that you're soliciting aren't confirmed yet, or venues that aren't confirmed yet, things like that. That's a good place to put it. But if there are other things that are more general, I would encourage you definitely to put those in the public description. Yep. So then we can save that, and then the last step before finishing the project is previewing it. You can also save your project and preview at any time. You don't necessarily need to save when you finish a section. You can always save and return to it. So this is a preview of how our project will appear. As you can see, this is how it will be viewed by the public, which means that none of our private information is showing up at the bottom. And this includes the work samples that we mark private, which is why you only see 2 work samples and not 3. But if everything looks good,
just a note that the collaborators don't show up until they're confirmed.
Yeah.
Or I mean, it says depending, but the actual profile doesn't show up, right?
Yeah. So if it all looks good, and it does for these purposes, then we can go back to the project and click submit, which case you do it again just to double sure that it's actually what you want it to look like. And then you submit the project. This congratulations with all this information. That generally it just says what the next steps are. And if at any time you want to revisit your project, you just go to projects under here, and while you can't make edits, you can always see what it looks like. And in this case, you can actually see what it looks like to the panelists. So there's all the information that was in the public description, but now you can see the private description, which includes the private work sample, the budget, and this private description. And that is basically it. So.
Right, time for questions.
Great. And as Scott said before, you can ask questions either on the Google Hangout event page or in the Hangout itself, or you can email info@newmusicusa.org with a subject line like Hangout question or something like that. So it looks like the first question is from David White, who is asking, would a lecture or demonstration project be eligible for funding? It depends. It's hard to know without some more context about the project you have in mind. But generally, we're able to support a project if it results either in the recording or a performance of a work. So it's pretty broad. It's hard to...
Yeah, we need a little bit more context on what that might entail. We definitely would want some sort of performance of the work to go along with that. Then probably will be fine. But yeah.
Cool. Any questions in user voice? Okay. Well, ask questions. There's plenty we can cover in the meantime, such as a lot of people have questions about doing projects abroad and whether those are eligible. As long as the groups involved are US based and the funds would be going to them, feel free to apply for projects that are actually happening outside of the United States. And just another thing that often comes up is questions about citizenship, and that you actually don't have to be a US citizen to request funding. You just have to be based in the United States. A couple other points to note while we, folks are getting their questions together. We state this in the guidelines, but I want to highlight it again, and that is that we are primarily interested in having our funds going to paying artists directly for their work. So what that means is requests that are for commission fees, artist fees, performance fees, recording fees, things like that are more likely to get funded than requests for venue rental, production costs, staff time, things like that. So we're definitely more interested in having the funds go towards paying artists and their work, towards their work. So that's something to keep in mind when you're putting in your request. Equipment costs are a questionable thing. Sometimes questionable, it depends. Sometimes if they're directly related to a project, then we can see that as potentially being an eligible request. But by and large, we're very much interested in having the funds going towards paying artists. Do you want me to go through anything? I've got a bunch of stuff. We have another question from Rick Bates. Asks, in terms of evaluating impact, how important is impact on applicants' career versus impact on community and impact on the field itself? That's a very good question. That is a very good question. I was just about to talk a little bit about some of the actual criteria. There is a blog post, I think, on our site that you can find that outlines the criteria that we give to our panelists, as well as some questions to help them sort of figure out these things. One of the things that we talk about, in fact, is like taking the project as a whole. What is the impact on the participating artist or composer and the community audience involved? So it could go either way. Depends on the project itself. Is it particularly meaningful opportunity for the composer? Then that's one way. That might be if you're a composer, an emerging composer who is having a great opportunity, or is it a meaningful opportunity for the community? And that might be a community that's a composer coming in, or having a composer of a certain stature being there. Same with organization and or musicians. How is this a meaningful opportunity for this? Why is it happening? What's the important things? What led to this, and why is it unique? Why are you so passionate about it? The other thing is, does the project represent an opportunity to build new relationships or strengthen existing relationships? And that we can think about that in terms of either with audiences, with an organization or performers, with other collaborators or community members. So talk about those relationships. Are these new relationships that you're forming? Are they existing relationships that are becoming deeper? Think about it in terms of that. We really want to hear about the relationship and what led to the project and why it's important for those involved. And that, like I said, that can take a lot of different forms. For one project is going to be different than the other project. So it's really up to you in terms of what the project is and why it's important to you right now. And I think that's something to think about in those terms. Some of the other criteria that we have, artistry obviously is a really big one. The first round review is solely an artistic review. I think our biggest cut after the first round. And then the second round, the panel reviews artistry again, as well as impact and capacity. But artistry is a very unique thing, and by its nature, it's a matter of interpretation. And there's a lot of ways to think about that. some things to think about is what the work is. It compels your interest. Does it make you want to keep listening? Does it embody a distinctive voice or an authentic artistic voice? Does it have craft or a technical excellence? Things like that. When picking work samples, it's something you really need to think about carefully. And I would encourage anyone who's applying to have other folks listen to or watch their work samples in relation to the project and give their own feedback. Does this get across what you're aiming at? Is it really tying in what you're trying to do? Is it a good quality work sample? Things like that. We as artists, we often get in our own head, and sometimes it's really nice to and it's really valuable to have an outside perspective. And that's basically what this is. I mean, our panel process is a panel of peers. These are other artists and performers and composers and administrators that work in the arts. So your peers are very much the same as our panel. So they'll give you an authentic input, and that can be very valuable when choosing work samples and your entire proposal as well, your project as well. I mean, like, have them look through it from a perspective. Give them the criteria that we have, give them that blog post, and have them look through it and say, well, have I hit all these points? Mm-hmm. The last criteria that we have is capacity, and this is a criteria that panelists don't really score. It's more yes no kind of thing, and it's whether or not they feel that the artist involved can do the project, and if the request amount is appropriate. And again, the request amount, what you're doing, and then whether or not you can do it. You can tackle this in the narrative or in the project description as to like whether or not you have other resources, or if this is the only thing that will be supporting the project. Those are the things to highlight. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add, Sam?
I think that covers the criteria. I actually, there's a chat on the Hangout, and I shared a link to it. The blog post that Scott mentioned about the panelist criteria. You can also go to the guidelines page, and there's all these helpful links on the right side of it. So we have a question that came in from User Voice, which is our help desk, from Deanna Witkowski that asks, what if I don't have work samples that are similar to the proposed project, i.e. different instrumentation or genre? That's a good question. In that case, and this is actually true for many of the projects, because often the people that are proposing haven't worked together. So I think a good rule of thumb there is to include work samples from all of the key collaborators on a project that you feel strongest, most best demonstrates their level of artistry, their work as an artist. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to the project that they're proposing, or even in the same genre, but just to convey to the panel that they are in fact capable of what you're proposing. I don't know if you have any other.
I mean, it is tricky, especially for projects that are brand new. Mostly in those situations, the panel is going to want to get a sense of quality past work by the collaborators or the artists involved. If there's something similar, that's usually a good thing. If it's, say, you're proposing a large jazz ensemble piece, if you're proposing a large ensemble piece, but you've never written one for that specific instrumentation, if you have something that might be comparable with a different instrumentation, either within terms of size or scope, those are usually helpful indicators. Trying to stay within, closest range, but when it comes down to it, you should submit the best projects that you feel, or the best work samples that you feel comfortable with, and the highest quality. Get as close as you can, but ultimately, you want to make sure that the work samples that you have demonstrate the excellence that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. One thing that I would add is that you try not to submit works in progress, because often those don't score well among panelists. Panelists generally tend to score either previous works or a completed
a completed product better than works in progress. It's just hard for them to contextualize everything, and especially because things aren't polished. So I would suggest not doing that. I would also suggest not, for a very similar reason, not applying with MIDI realizations. I would stick to recordings. It's just hard with MIDI realizations because it's computer playing everything. It's hard to get a sense of how it would actually be performed and how it would actually sound with an ensemble or a soloist.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a project yet that's been submitted with MIDI realization do that well. I don't think so.
Yeah.
So it's live recordings or recorded recordings or something like that with live people is usually is almost always better.
Yeah, even if the recording quality is that great.
Yeah. To keep in mind is if you're submitting video, it's best usually not to have promotional trailer type videos.
Mm-hmm.
Ones that do quick cuts between several different works or pieces. The panel prefers to see a complete piece or a complete part of a piece versus trailer-esque or mashup kind of work samples. Those don't tend to do very well. They don't get you can't really get a good enough sense of the work itself in that context.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Just a reminder that if you do have questions, you can ask on the Google Hangout events page in the Hangout itself, or send us an email at info@newmusicusa.org. We're happy to answer any and all questions related to project grants, really anything. If it's specific to a project you're submitting, we can follow up after this, but anything that you are wondering about, we can answer right now. Yeah, we can keep chatting about work samples because I think that's where people struggle the most in choosing what is the most competitive for them and for the project. One note that Kristen maybe can talk about are work sample lengths, because often we get people that submit entire concerts, like an hour and a half of footage for one work sample, which just isn't realistic. I don't know if you have any insight about lengths.
I just think from some of the panelist comments, and I think this sort of goes along with the narrative that you're trying to promote and give context for the panelist. Vision is where do you, they're reviewing a lot of projects, and so they don't have maybe an hour per project. So if you have some targeted points that you think really show and highlight your capabilities as an artist or a group, then it's best to do those 2 points in the work sample, so it directs the panelists exactly where you want them to go. And if they do have extra time, they can, of course, continue on and review the work samples in their entirety. But on the off chance that they are, in a time crunch, it's just best to have those in place so they can get to exactly what you want them to see as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and just to add to that, through our own tracking that we've done, panelists generally spend about 15 minutes per project. So given that time frame, I would say that a 3 to 5 minute excerpt or piece per work sample is safe. But I wouldn't include something that's like 30 minutes as a single work sample without any 2 points, because then they're gonna just play it and then stop after a few minutes and not get really the sense that you wanted them to get from the piece.
Yeah, I think if you think on average, anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes per project by our panel on this is probably about what's average going right now. And so yeah, really you want to direct them as best you can to what you want them to see, what you want them to know. You can be brief in the
the narratives, but you should also be complete. And that's important to note. We get a lot of projects that are submitted with 2 or 3 sentence narratives, and those aren't really complete enough for this. The panel doesn't really have enough context to understand what the project is from that type of narrative. Mm-hmm. So you should think about exactly what you want to do and how you want to get it across, but be concise, but don't be brief, or don't be, another thing I would add in regards to your project and your profile is that there's an important distinction where once you submit your project, then it's done. You can't make changes. You can't add new collaborators. But if you've added collaborators before you submit, they can confirm their collaboration at any time during the process. So they can confirm after the deadline. We generally want them to confirm within a couple weeks after the deadline because that's when the panel usually gets started. And a note about the actual profiles themselves is that they can be edited at any time. So you don't have to make sure your profile is perfect by the time you submit. You can keep editing after the deadline. You can make changes, you can add links, you can change out your work samples. That's okay, just the project right now cannot be edited once it's submitted. And that's an important note.
And I'm just going to go briefly back to what we were talking about with the narrative too. When I first started working here, I felt the thing that best described how to go about creating your project and the narrative is sort of putting it in the context of a GoFundMe page or a Kickstarter, because if you are funded, then this becomes public, mm-hmm. and you want people have the chance to follow you, like come to your concerts, do all these updates. So if you can frame the narrative and the description in a sort of GoFundMe Kickstarter way, then it's going to be really set up if you are funded after the whole thing is over.
Yeah, your project's description should be more public facing and marketing oriented as opposed to the language you would use to normally approach a funder. So it doesn't necessarily need to be super formal. It can be as, I guess, how you would market your project, how you want to talk about it, and what's important about it. I don't. Be mindful of the criteria as well when you do that. But yes, I mean, the idea is that this will be public, and if awarded, these pages are been dynamic, and people can follow them. You can provide updates to them as the project evolves. So there's dynamic public-facing pages, and that's a good way to think of it. Cool. Any other questions? Anybody have questions out there? Yeah, keep asking your questions. We will be here for 15 more minutes answering them. I'm looking over the guidelines to see if there's anything else that is. I think it's worth noting in the guidelines. If you go down to where is it? Yes, supportable activity right there. We fund a wide range of activity. There's all sorts of things: commissioning, musician fees, travel, copying costs, artist fees, outreach activity fees, all sorts of things that we've covered through the program. That said, we do have a few areas that we place special emphasis on and have dedicated funding towards. The first of which is the creation of new work or commissioning fees. This is one of the larger areas that we fund through project grants. I think in the past it's been up to about 45% mm-hmm. of our projects funds go towards the creation of new work. So that's a big one. Another one that we have is new live music for dance. So if you're working with a dance company, or if you are a dance company and you want to use new music or live music for dance, that we have that's an area of emphasis. Third is recording costs. We have a small amount of money for that. And that said, though, this is one of the largest request areas that we receive. Probably about 60, mm-hmm. sometimes 65% of the requests we get are for recording costs. We supplement. We have dedicated funding, and then we supplement more to fund as much as we can for that. So that's an area. And then lastly is residency and community outreach activities. Those are situations where an artist is going into a community, doing activities with them, a composer or an artist. So those are some areas of emphasis that we have. But like I said, within that, we fund a very broad range of projects, and you'll see all across the board. And we have funded all the way down to $250 and all the way up to $15,000. Mm-hmm. Our average award now is around, I still want to say around 5,000, but it's probably about 4,500, mm-hmm. somewhere around there is the average award. There are a number of awards that we make 3,000 and below. Sometimes as high as 40% of our awards are in that category. And there are a number of larger awards that get awarded as well. So we do fund the full gamut, but that's just to give you a sense.
We have another question from Rick, who asks, so if you have an application pending, say at the Copeland Foundation, and you get this, how does it impact on this application? It really doesn't impact this application. It's nice to know if you have something pending, if you include that in the private description, or if you have funding secured from them, but it really doesn't play that much into it. Maybe in the capacity review, but yeah, it's generally not a big thing that we take into consideration. And this is another question from Rick, who wants us to clarify, the majority of your applications are for recording, but you have a small amount for that.
We have a small endowment that's for recording, but we supplement that with unrestricted funds. But with that, we still can't necessarily meet all the need for recording costs. There aren't that many organizations that actually fund recordings. I think there are only 2, ours and the Aaron Copeland Fund, that I'm aware of. So it's a need that's out in the field, and we're actively looking to secure more funding for it. But at the moment, we have a small endowment that goes directly towards that, but we also supplement with unrestricted funds in order to meet as much as we can. And so that's the situation there. We got a question from David White in User Voice. Generally speaking, about what percentage of the project budget should be devoted to marketing promotion of the event where new music will be performed?
I feel like that's very project specific, and we don't have any particular guidelines or anything we're looking for that. It's the budget that you include on our site is, I mean, it's entirely project specific. It can be whatever you want. We don't have a lot of funding to cover marketing costs, so we would be less inclined to cover marketing costs on a project as opposed to commissioning fees or artist fees or something like that. I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, given the competitiveness of the program and the funds that we have available, we're more inclined to have our funds go towards paying artists for what they're doing, whether that be performing, creating, recording, all sorts of things like that. You should include, the funds that you have set aside for marketing and promotion, and that's an important thing to take note of. But we don't necessarily have any guidelines about what percentage of the budget should be devoted to that in this context. So,
yeah. And I'm actually going to share another blog post which breaks down project grants as a whole over all of our rounds to sort of show how much money we've given away and where that money went. So if it went to like a recording project, it looks like based on posts, 49% of the projects were for commissioning, 36 of the projects were for recording, and et cetera, et cetera. It also lists a median award there. I'm just going to plop it in the chat here. Yeah. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us at info@newmusicusa.org or drop it in the actual Hangout or on the Hangout page itself.
Otherwise, I think we might be close to.
Yeah, we've got
time.
to.
Yeah. Anything else that is good to know? If you're wondering about when awards will be announced, every project organizer who submits a project will receive an email when awards are announced, updating them on the status of their project. This will happen towards the end of June, but definitely before July 1st, which is the start of our next fiscal
Before
year.
July 1st, there'll be the last few days of June. We'll have to make an announcement.
Yeah, and then just to note that we're able to support projects that have occurred up to 6 months before the deadline, or that will occur up to 2 years after. So we can do retroactive funding, and the time range is approximately 2.5 years from October of 2015 to April of 2018. Cool. Well, if there's no other questions, I think that we're done. If you have other questions that you think of after the Hangout, feel free to email us at info@newmusicusa.org, and one of us will get back to you as soon as possible.
And actually note that now from basically here on out, the best way to reach us is through the email info@newmusicusa. All three of us are on that, and you'll get a response very quickly that way. If you try to call us, it'll likely take a little bit longer, and we can't guarantee that we'll get back to you right away. We're due to the high volume of questions that we get. So the quickest way really to get us is through email at info@.
Yeah, and just to be a little more specific, if you email us, we'll probably get back within 24 hours. If you call us, it might take several days. And that's just because of all the communications we're getting. So just keep that in mind. But yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, do email us, and we look forward to seeing your projects.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.